Which members of the Miami Dolphins 2024 rookie class are in line to take the most snaps throughout the 2024 season? We're getting into that here today on this episode of Locked On Dolphins.
You are Locked On Dolphins, your daily Miami Dolphins podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, Miami, welcome to another episode of Locked On Dolphins. It's your team every day here on the Locked On Network. I'm your host, Kyle Krabs, a lifelong Miami Dolphins fan, host of Locked On Dolphins, co-host of Locked On NFL Scouting. You can find our shows on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Tip of the cap to our everydayers because it is your team every day. We don't just say it, we live it here on the Locked On Network. Today's episode of Locked On Dolphins is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code Locked On NFL for $20 off your first purchase on last-minute tickets with the lowest prices guaranteed. Today on the show, we are looking at the 2024 rookie class. Some fringe UDFAs, maybe, but quite frankly, this conversation is dedicated to the draft class because I'm looking at these players. We got training camp coming up starting next week. The rookies report this week to kind of begin this onboarding process. And for this 7-player Dolphins draft class, there's a lot of expectations in a lot of different places for a lot of different members of the draft class. And I think some of that is achievable. And I think some of that is maybe a little bit lofty with the expectations for the individual players. So I decided I was going to rank in order the players who I thought were going to take the most snaps from this year's rookie class throughout the course of the season for the Dolphins. This is, of course, pending injury. You can try to project some of that a little bit with the offensive line and offensive tackle, although Kendall Lamb was consistent last year and playing over 600 snaps for you at offensive tackle as the swing guy. But I think it's a lot easier to look at the offseason roster and point to guys I think have a pretty long shot, and it includes a few guys that were a part of that draft class. If you asked me which drafted rookies don't make the team, I think Patrick McMorris has a pretty steep uphill climb. I think between the 4 safeties definitively in front of him and Javon Holland, Jordan Poyer, Marcus May, and Elijah Campbell, plus Nick Needham, who is cross-trained and capable of playing at safety, and Jalen Ramsey can do some of those types of things as well. McMorris is going to have to be an absolute killer on special teams. Is he enough of an absolute killer to justify the team moving on from, I didn't even mention Saron Neal, who's kind of a pseudo safety nickel corner hybrid type player. You got a lot of bodies that are proven in these roles, and Saron Neal's been a very effective special teams player for quite some time at the NFL level. So Patrick McMorris, I think, is one of 2 players off this draft class team for the Dolphins that entering into training camp, my expectations are pretty tempered as far as even competing to make the roster. And that's not necessarily a slight against Patrick McMorris. He could come in and blow the doors off the thing, right? But at the same time, that feels like an insurmountable amount of competition for a 6th-round pick with an athletic profile that doesn't blow you out of the water. The other one for me is Taj Washington. And you can look at all the UDFAs, and I know some people are hopeful that Matthew Jones from Ohio State can kind of be a thing for the Dolphins on the offensive line. A couple defensive linemen and Grayson Murphy and Mario Kendricks and Leonard Payne. There's some other competitive guys like Mark Perry at safety who at least pop to you for some kind of reason. But the competition in those rooms, I think, is pretty intense. Taj Washington at wide receiver. We've gone over the wide receiver competition. Hill, Waddle, Beckham, Berrios, Craycraft, Ezukanma, Anthony Schwartz, Malik Washington, Taj Washington, Braylon Sanders, Jaquan Burton. Man, that's a loaded room. There's probably 7 guys that could end up on a 53-man roster in the wide receiver room. We talk about the offensive tackle or the offensive line distribution for Miami, and the depth is there. It's just you wish the top 5 was a little bit more sturdy. I think wide receiver has both, and that spells bad news for guys who you are skeptical are going to be able to find the ancillary ways to impact the team and make a roster. For me, that includes Taj Washington. Productive player at USC. Looked like he made a few nice plays in the receiving game for the Dolphins throughout the course of minicamp and OTAs. But that hill is a lot to climb. I know I pegged, I believe it was Mark Perry was the guy who I had picked, as if you asked me which sleeper UDFA had the best chance to make the roster, he was one of the names that came to mind, either him or Hayden Rusi at tight end. Those, again, are players. The tight end position's one where you've got five guys, I think, four guys with a really strong chance and argument to make the 53. I don't know that they're going to carry that. Was it last week or the week before I did a 53, and I had legit 58 to 60 players that I wanted to keep on the roster, and that didn't include these UDFAs. So if you ask me which players of the rookie class did not take any snaps because they did not make the team from the drafted players, I would say the last two, Patrick Morris, Taj Washington, going to be on the outside looking in. Now, that doesn't necessarily say too much. That shouldn't be too bold of a take. But the rest of these guys, you have Chop Robinson in the first round, Patrick Paul, offensive tackle from Houston in the second round. And then you have fourth round pick, Jalen Wright at running back. You have Muhammad Kamara, pass rusher from Colorado State, and Malik Washington, wide receiver from Virginia by way of Northwestern. Those are the five guys the Dolphins drafted first, and I've seen a lot of enthusiasm about one of these guys. It was a little bit lower on my list than you might expect. That's what we're going to get into next here on this episode of Locked On Dolphins, so make sure that you stick with us. Go to the game is not supposed to be stressful. I know the disaster class of what happened with the Copa America game at Hard Rock Stadium last night. Sometimes you get tickets, you don't even don't even get to get in the gate and go to the game. So I feel for those people quite a bit, but typically it's not that extreme of an experience as far as stress goes with going to your favorite sporting events. But you can take as much of the stress out as you possibly can by getting your tickets through Gametime. Gametime is an authorized ticket marketplace for Major League Baseball. It makes getting tickets faster and easier than ever before. Prices on Gametime actually go down the closer you get to first pitch. They have killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and a lowest price guarantee, making Gametime the place to take the guesswork out of buying tickets for Major League Baseball. You can save up to 60% off buying tickets for sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and more. You mentioned the flash deals and zone deals. There's all-in pricing, so there's no surprises when you put the tickets into your cart and go to check out. I love the fact that you get a sight line so you can see exactly what you're signing yourself up for before you hit purchase on your tickets. And Gametime will credit you 110% of the difference if you find cheaper tickets in the same row and section for less. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONNFL, LOCKEDON NFL for $20 off. Download Gametime today for last-minute tickets with the lowest prices guaranteed. The next tier, I really have this in three tiers as far as I don't think you're going to make the roster. You're certainly going to make the roster, in my opinion, but I think you're a long shot to play more than, barring injuries, 100 to 200 snaps. This is kind of 100 to 200 snap territory for these next two guys. And it's Patrick Paul, offensive tackle, and Malik Washington, wide receiver from Virginia. Now, I know Mike McDaniel heaped glowing praise on the phone to Malik Washington for his opportunity as a member of the Miami Dolphins. And I think long-term, he has that opportunity. How achievable it is in 2024, though, is kind of where it gives me a little bit of pause. So we'll talk Patrick Paul first, right? I think this was inspired by, I went on the Joe Rose show this morning, and he asked me about playing time for the rookies. And Patrick Paul, he asked to see effectively a redshirt year. And I said kind of yes and no. If you told me that the Dolphins ended up getting some jumbo sets running the ball for Patrick Paul and to get him on the field and utilize one of his apparent strengths, which is just his overwhelming combination of length and explosiveness off the ball. I mean, that meets the MO of everything this team is looking for. So, yes, you can look at Kendall Lamb as the de facto swing tackle, as he should be, based off of his experience with the scheme. He's been with the team since late in 2022, based on the fact that he played admirable football. Now, maybe Patrick Paul comes in and pushes past Kendall Lamb and does so very quickly and becomes the swing tackle. I certainly don't think he's a starter. He's the heir to Teron Armstead, right? But if you told me Patrick Paul was the fourth tackle all season long, I wouldn't bat an eye. I think that's the proper expectation for him to have as a player. And then it's just a matter of, are they going to find unique ways to get him on the field? I would not be surprised if that's the case. Ergo, if you told me he played between 100 and 200 snaps, maybe he had to start a game at some point along the way due to injuries, multiple injuries at offensive tackle. So maybe he gets a game's worth of starts there, and then maybe he gets kind of some sparing or sprinkling of jumbo sets throughout the course of the season. That's kind of where I think Patrick Paul's journey for his rookie season ends up. And the nice thing about that is it will give you a year of being hands-on with a player before you presumably transition away from Teron Armstead, and then you have to have the confidence that you have a capable player in his place. And if you don't have confidence after 1 year of Patrick Paul, then you can go shopping for the right kind of fit in free agency to serve as competition for that role for the 2025 season. Of course, you're not hoping that happens, but you need to protect yourself and have contingencies in all of these situations. That's the role and responsibility of the executives that run the team. Malik Washington, really dynamic player, looks the part. I would love to be proven wrong here. I would love for Malik Washington to come in and very quickly establish himself as the player that you were hoping you were going to get between Braxton Berrios and Odell Beckham as the special team / wide receiver 3 type player last year and this year combined that you're hoping to see with Odell. I would love for Malik Washington to be that guy. The reality of it, though, is this is a very complex offense. And I understand there's times, and I have alluded to this past week, some tempo, some no huddle, times in which it can be more simple. The pillars of this offense require a lot of shift in motion. It requires a lot of sight adjustments. It requires a lot of blocking assignments. It requires a lot of understanding and reading of routes in real time. And not only understanding all of it, but also mastering the timing and gaining the trust of your quarterback in the process. And Odell Beckham's been around the block, right? Everybody knows what the expectations are for Odell. Everybody knows what the expectations are for Tyreek Hill. He's going to get targeted 180 plus times. Everybody knows the expectations for Jalen Waddle. He's going to get targeted 120 or so times. And they're going to command the majority volume, and then you're going to spread it around to the backs, and Devon Achane's getting more into the passing game, and Jonnu Smith's been brought in with a specific role in mind. And it all just adds up to me wondering, what's the year one impact for Malik Washington? This is certainly a player that I would not play any games with. I would not tempt fate and cut him to try to put him on the practice squad because he's a 6th-round pick. Somebody else can pluck that dude up. Happened to you last year with Elijah Higgins, right? I don't want to play that game with Malik Washington because I think all of the air of expectations that exist for him are the proper stratosphere of expectations long-term for the player. I loved him. I had a 3rd-round grade on him coming out. But what does he do in the first year in the system with the competition that's in front of him, with all of the nuance that you have to develop within this offense, the way that it's currently constructed? I don't know. I certainly wouldn't put him above any of the 3 other rookies drafted as far as expectations for role and impact in year one. We'll talk about those next 3 guys and which one is ultimately my top pick for most snaps taken this upcoming season here on Locked On Dolphins. Make sure you stick with us. Today's episode of Locked On Dolphins is sponsored by BetterHelp. Comparison can be the thief of joy. Sometimes it's easy to get wrapped up and envy others people's lives because, while it may look like they have their stuff together on Instagram and social media, in reality, everybody's going through their own battles. Therapy can help you focus on what you want instead of what others have, so you can start living your best life. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's designed to be online, completely convenient, flexible, suited to your schedule. You can fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Stop comparing and start focusing. Comparison can be the thief of joy. Visit betterhelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. I do think Mohamed Kamara, the other late round draft pick, the 5th round pick, is next in this pecking order. So I have from 5 to 3, 5 Patrick Paul, 4 Malik Washington, 3 Mohamed Kamara as far as volume of snaps. I know everybody's on Jalen Phillips' watch, and he posted pictures updating his rehab and his workouts, and everybody's getting the microscope out and looking at his calf. And I've had people ask me, what's this picture tell you? And I do have a degree in kinesiology and exercise science, but one thing that I very firmly feel is it'd be irresponsible for me without any intimate knowledge of Jalen and his rehab process and what they've been telling him and what he's been working through and what the progress has been like, to make any kind of speculation based off of a picture that's in the mirror of the front of his shin about what that prognosis looks like as far as a return to play. So I'm not going to speculate on it. I've heard some promising whispers in the wind, though, for Jalen specifically. We saw Bradley Chubb jogging around in this football camp 2 weeks ago. So who knows? But I do think rotationally, there's going to be an opportunity. And Mohamed Kamara, I think where he has the opportunity to really shine is in some of the early downs. He's a heavy-handed player. He can play the run. He can collapse against tight ends. You play him on a rotational basis. I think this is a player who's pro-ready enough from a power perspective to be a guy who takes 300 snaps for you. Like, I don't think that's outside the realm of possibility. I'm not a math guy, but I do have my calculator right here. And I can tell you 300 snaps divided by 17 games. That'd be like 15 to 18 snaps a game. Okay, on average, you play 50 to 70 snaps defensively on either side of the ball. So, yeah, he's not going to be a de facto starter for you. And even if both Chubb and Phillips miss time at the beginning of the season, your de facto starters are going to be either Chop Robinson or Shaq Barrett and Calais Campbell. And early in the season, in a hypothetical like that, Kamara takes more snaps, and maybe he does push for second on this personal list of mine as far as the hierarchy of snap expectations for the rookies. But that's where I'm at with Mohamed Kamara right now. And then that leaves Jalen Wright and Chop Robinson. Let me present the argument for either one. We've discussed with Jalen Wright, the Shanahan-style offenses have been historically at their best with 3 backs who take meaningful snaps for the football team. And that's for Atlanta, that's for San Francisco. They like to have a lot of fresh bodies. Jalen Wright brings an element from a running style that this team did not have last year as far as the blend of size between the tackle ability and explosive power and home run hitting ability. They frankly did not have it. And he comes into the league perceived as a good pass protector. That still has to manifest itself in the pros. That's a heck of an argument, right? Especially if Devon Achane's going to start moving around and popping up over here and popping up over there, and he's going to be one of these Swiss Army knife type players for Mike McDaniel. And if that's the case, that's the argument in the pathway for Jalen Wright having the most snaps of any player that's a rookie on the team. I think he can be a really nice compliment to Raheem because both of those guys I perceive as guys that can really have a lot of success running inside and outside. Can Devon Achane run between the tackles? Yes. Is it where he's going to be at his best? No. Is he ever going to push a pile? Absolutely not. Chop Robinson. Allude to the injuries for both of your top 2 guys. This was the team's first round pick. You consider the pressure heavy front, it's been very rotational heavy. Chop Robinson being potentially third on the depth chart. It might be higher than that, but third on the depth chart for defensive ends automatically translates to more snaps than being third on the depth chart at running back. I think Chop's flexibility based on how Penn State used him and stood him up and played him in interior gaps. That's a nice insurance policy for Jalen Phillips early in the season, because that's an area that Phillips has absolutely shined throughout the course of the Boyer and Flores scheme years. I could see them bringing that back. There's going to be a lot more simulated pressures. There's going to be times where he's walked up in a gap and he's going to rush, but he's going to loop and they're going to drop somebody else out. I think it's a lot easier to slap a guy in there and say, hey, go rush the passer on 3rd and 7+ than it is, hey, we want you to take a scam protection. We're going to point the mic over here. So the line's going to do a half slide this way, and then there's going to be a man side, and you got to work 1 to 2. And if they're going to bring 2, then understand that you're going to be hot, but you can't run out of there. You got to stay in and take the first guy. But if the mic falls, or if the mic falls out and the strong safety rotates down, then you got to get all the way over there and get outside the offensive tackle to block in that regard. And then, oh, by the way, we're going to run the ball. And here's all the different ways that we run inside zone. It's a more direct and simpler way to play. To say, hey, go rush passer. Line up in this gap. You're going to run a stunt, or you're going to use your first step explosiveness, and you're going to overwhelm an interior offensive lineman that's going to try and step down on you, shut the inside gap, and you're going to come. And we know that based on the center protection rules that they have, if we put an extra body on the end over on this side, they're going to push the line that way. So it's going to have to be the guard, and the center's going to try kickstand. You can just rip right through it, right? And that's why I do think Chop Robinson's my choice. I think it's a coin toss, though. But I would say Chop Robinson 500-ish snaps. I would say Malik Wright 400 to 500 snaps. I'd say Muhammad Kamara about 300 snaps. And then Patrick Paul and Malik Washington, I would say both those guys get between 100 and 200 snaps. That's kind of my hierarchy right now entering into training camp as far as expectations for snap and roll for the rookies on the team. But it's just my opinion. And the beauty of it is these guys are total wild cards and unknown. And somebody's going to come in and blow you away with how good they look, and somebody's going to leave you wanting more. And you're going to have to sit there and sort all those guys out. We're about a week and a half away from them hitting the practice field and getting after it. Which means we got a great content week ahead of us. And starting the week after that, I'll be down in South Florida for training camp. I'll be there for practices, including a few before the public practices start. So make sure you hit subscribe. Keep it locked in right here on Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day. I appreciate you guys for checking out the show. Go Dolphins. I'll talk to you all again soon.